All right, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, welcome, wherever you are in the world. Going to be getting started very shortly. Got some brand new news, and this time it is something properly massive. All the new lores of magic, including Slaanesh and Nurgle. Just fantastic. We've also got both the new Lords of Magic for Kislev and Cathay. So we're going to be jumping into all of them. They've given us descriptions of all of the spells. We get to see our first sort of very brief glimpses of Nurgle and Slaanesh. We get the backside of a couple of their demons and some shots of their realms. And lots of other goodies to look at. Some contact effects, some new spell UI, and so forth. So let's get straight to it. I want to give a quick shout out to all my patrons and channel members real quick. If you guys want to support the channel, feel free to join either of those. It is very much appreciated. You guys are the people keeping this operation afloat, let's be honest. So let's, without further ado, transition on over, and I'll bring up the chat as well here. Let's see. Yes, here it is. So, new spells. Lots and lots of new spells. There are in total, what, 7 new Lores of Magic that we have revealed here. So that is quite exciting. We've got Horus Heresy, Tam and Ten, of course, members. Big thanks for your guys' generosity. Tam and Ten going to be rewatching this later. Hope you enjoy your dinner. Or you enjoyed, I guess, your dinner. What are the Order Tide? What are those Order Tide magics? Yes, so the Order Tide magics are for Kislev and Cathay. Yes, Yin and Yang and Ice and Tempest, which all are very interesting. But we're gonna start with Lore of Tzeentch. We're also gonna talk about. I didn't last week highlight the new Storm of Magic and sort of the new campaign mechanics for Magic. So we'll also talk about that after we hit on all the lores here, but let's jump into it. Starting out with Lore of Tzeentch, we've already seen a handful of these spells in some cinematic fashion, but here we go, starting with Magic Missiles, just basic blue fire of Tzeentch. Single target magic missiles that applies Warp Flame debuff, and as you'll see, many of these Tzeentch spells have the Warp Flame contact effect. It's essentially like 50% armor sundering, 50% weakness to fire, right? Because your typical weakness to fire contact effect, flammable, I think is 22% weakness to fire, right? And it's minus 30 armor for armor sundering, so then basically this is like a half and half of each, which I think is great. Seems pretty strong as well. 15 armor isn't a ton, but it is enough to make a meaningful difference within certain contexts, especially like going from like 90 to 75 is actually pretty impactful. Yeah. Let's see here. We've got Magic Missile. Pink Fire of Tzeentch is a breath, so right off the bat, 2 damage dealing spells, low tier, help keep that Warp Flame contact effect up over time. Both Overcast deals additional armor piercing. In the case of the missiles, Blue Fire, Pink Fire is just bonus damage. We've got a Hex here, Treason of Tzeentch. Lowers leadership of all enemies in the affected area. It remains to be seen by how big the effect area is, kind of how it compares to something like Doom and Darkness. Overcast version also lowers melee attack, which may be helpful in a pinch, or may mean that depending on the cost of the spell, you will pretty much always want to overcast it specifically for the attack debuff. Given that Tzeentch looks fairly squishy, it does seem like an attack debuff would be pretty strong for them. Glean Magic, this is an interesting one. The only issue is that the spell, like, sort of scaling math needs to work for this spell to be useful. Like, it's a power recharge spell, which we have, like, Power of Darkness, which damages a friendly unit for the Dark Elves in return for, in theory, giving you more Winds of Magic. In practice, at least in multiplayer, it's basically never worth it to cast that spell, because the Winds of Magic that you would get from casting it isn't even enough to pay for the act of casting the spell. I think in campaign you can possibly cast it for free, which, you know, does make a little bit more sense. But anyway, this one, it doesn't damage your units, but it does increase your power recharge reserve while decreasing your enemies. So the decreasing of your enemies if that's an impactful enough effect to be worthwhile, then maybe we will take this spell anyway against certain factions like Lizardmen, vampire counts that might rely on magic, high elves, dark elves. That you can expect to bring maybe some powerful casters. But it just depends on whether the math plays out correctly. Tzeentch's Firestorm is the one we see in the screenshot here. It's very interesting. It's essentially a triple vortex. You get 3 for the price of 1, which is so much fun. I'm a huge fan of vortexes in general, so that's awesome. And then Infernal Gateway, it says vortex, but really you can think of this like a Pit of Shades, like a stationary vortex. Yeah. Stationary, massive area damage. So essentially like a big juiced up Pit of Shades. Moving on now. Yeah, I would guess if ogres are going to be the pre-order, which seems like 99% at this point that it seems like they will be the pre-order, then yeah, we will get one more magic. That is a good point. A lore magic in the future. Moving on to lore of Slaanesh, we first get again. I don't know. If I can zoom in here a little bit more? We do actually get a tiny little bit of a demon, right? Tiny little shot of a demon right there, and a little bit of the background of the realm of Slaanesh too, which looks pretty spooky, if I'm being completely honest. But anyway, zoom back out here. The spells. So starting out, we've got Lash of Slaanesh, a breath. Little damage breath spell, should be pretty decent. Yeah, Overcast deals increased armor piercing damage. Conal damage spell that sends enemies flying, so should be interesting. Acquiesce, this is a hex. Decreases speed and melee defense of a target unit. So my guess is probably Slaanesh is the most speed-focused of the demon factions. So being able to slow your opponent down so that your own fast units can catch them easier does seem like it'll potentially be quite nice. Melee defense also, once they catch them, they'll be able to get the better hits in. Hysterical Frenzy is an augment. Caster's victims are engulfed by a torrent of unreasoning emotion, excruciating pain, and blissful rapture. So it buffs armor-piercing weapon damage and melee attack of a unit, as well as giving them the Rampage attribute. Giving something a Rampage is not always the best, but it can actually be like no big deal. So if the math, again, works out for the buff side of this, then it will be worth it to cast. Pavane of Slaanesh is just a direct damage, so that's, deals direct damage and reduces melee attack of a target unit. That's interesting. I don't think we've seen a few debuff / damage spells. No Cost Mystifying Miasma, for example, has a speed component, but I don't know that we've had one that has a melee attack component. As I mentioned, melee attack modifiers tend to be pretty strong in general, given the current math of how attack and defense work. And I do think that this will possibly be pretty good then, given the duration, sort of the damage you get out of it, as well as the melee attack debuff. Could be pretty decent. Again, just kind of depends on math of everything. We don't have any specifics, and I'm sure everything's still in the process of being balanced. So I've also got Slicing Shards here on Bombardment from the Sky, Mirror Forms, only to be shattered by myriad deadly shards that lacerate the enemy below. Beautiful. Sounds amazing. And Phantasmagoria. This is one that off the bat people are going to say is very strong because it's a hard snare. Prevents movement of all units in an area and also reduces leadership. So again, if we assume that Slaanesh is going to be focused around speed and shock damage, being able to essentially net a bunch of units and also decrease their leadership while also charging them from multiple angles is going to overlap a bunch of leadership debuffs, and most likely you'll be able to route units very quickly. Again, a lot of it depends on duration, cost. It is an area of effect. So off the bat, area of effect snares tend to be very competitive kind of regardless, just because you can interrupt your opponent. You can even transfixing an opponent for a short amount of time and putting them in place so you can attack a whole bunch of stuff, overwhelming force. That's going to be pretty strong. So already off the bat, yes, Lore of Slaanesh looks to be really good because of that. We see here a screenshot of the Slicing Shards. You can see kind of a shard of glass falling from the sky and a bunch of them impacting there. So very cool. I'm looking forward to seeing that in action. Next up, Lore of Nurgle. Now we've got our net, and we're going to skip all the way to the last one here and just talk about healing and then go back, because healing, like nets, is a very competitive ability type in general. Chaos lacks any sort of healing spells as it is, so Fleshy Abundance here, the most repulsive growth spurt imaginable occurs. I love this from... kind of a thematic perspective. It makes a lot of sense. Greatly replenishes the hit points of a target unit. That greatly replenishes modifiers means it's probably something north of 1,000 HP, if I had to guess, like the regrowth. Overcast changes to an area effect, and I'd imagine that has a limited number of targets, like Earthblood and Invocation of Nehek, and all other area of effect healing spells specifically. Passive effects usually do not, although some do. Anyway, so yeah, Chaos healing will be very, very strong, especially if like Norska, Warriors of Chaos, possibly Beastmen. I'm not sure as much on the lore for them. If they will get access to these lores, that will be exceptionally strong. Like, could you imagine like healing Shaggoths or Mammoths with Fleshy Abundance? But, okay, so we have nets and healing potentially for Chaos factions, which is going to be very strong. The rest of Lore of Tzeentch is, we get what is this guy? A Plague Bearer, like a caster-level Plague Bearer. Again, shot of his backside right here, which is just awesome. Got a Hex, Miasma of Pestilence, reduced melee attack and charge bonus. Nurgle's going to be the tank faction for sure. Lots of healing, lots of poison, slows, debuffs as we see here. Stream of Corruption is a breath. I love this. Diseased gas and bile spews forth from the spellcaster's diseased lungs, so that's great. Just lovely. A nice long thin cone attack. A Curse of the Leper adds armor and damage reflection. So again, another really interesting sort of tank type ability, but also has a damage component. Given that I'd imagine Nurgle units are going to have relatively low damage output, this damage reflection means if someone tries to come in with a strong burst, which will probably be very good against Nurgle, it's a way to kind of get through units quickly. You add this damage reflection, and suddenly that burst gets, reflected. It doesn't say exactly what this is, if it's only melee, if it's only ranged, if it's all damage types. Could you imagine if you hit this? Like, if this works just one-to-one, like, damage for damage, like, let's say you throw this on a basic infantry unit that's about to get hit by a vortex. If all of the damage from that vortex that's hitting all of those unit models gets reflected onto an individual caster, you could potentially kill them instantly. Maybe not necessarily instantly, but pretty close to that. I mean, you can mostly wipe a unit if you get a lucky vortex. So yeah, some concerns here that this could be ludicrously OP, but we'll see if it only works in certain situations or against certain types of damage, or if it works against all damage. Rancid Visitations, another direct damage, not really any other modifiers there, so it's boring and it's probably going to be pretty good. Blight Boil is a big high tier explosion, massive explosion target area. Overcast deals more damage, does say after a short delay, so possibly dodgeable. But Lore of Nurgle also looks really strong. I mean, I'd imagine all three of the Chaos lores are going to be just extremely strong if used appropriately. But I mean, Lore of Nurgle, depending on how this damage reflect works, depending on the math for the regeneration, the Fleshy Abundance as well, will be probably the best. It's hard to say, but oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and these screenshots might have been created relatively early on in that process, so I don't know. Everything's work in progress. I wouldn't take anything too much fervor, I guess. Take everything with a grain of salt. Anyway, speaking of fervor, let's go on to Lore of Yin. First order lore for Cathay. This is the one with Missile Mirror, and I think this is the one that Anti-Meow has access to. I think Crazy Uncle Zhao has the other one, I want to say, but we'll look at that in just a second. So starting on Storm of Shadows, greatly reduces speed of a target unit. Could be pretty strong, since it's a basic, first spell. Could relatively cheap as well. They have a hiding spell, which is great, being able to hide your terracotta sentinel as he approaches if you're, in a situation where somehow you're going to get outshot. Seems unlikely, but still. This shadowy barrier of dark yin energy turns aside enemy sorcerers. So unit gains snipe, stalk, and unspottable. So snipe is really interesting. That is, man, depending on the uptime of this, that's going to be potentially quite broken. You can just cast this, on your cannons or on your... if you can cast it on flying units, you could cast it on your, rocket balloons. Could be quite strong. I like that. Hiding spells are situationally really useful in multiplayer. I don't know. In campaign, I actually haven't tried them that much. I don't know if the AI can actually ignore them or not, but anyway. Blossom Wind is a wind spell. Also causes blinded on contact, so that is really strong. Essentially, it's like a way to give an area of effect, like a small area of effect, enfeebling foe with a damage component. So Blossom Wind, very strong. Missile Mirror, also potentially very strong in certain matchups. It doesn't say that there's any restrictions here, so you could potentially cast this on artillery from what I'm reading, unless, there's some restriction that's unlisted. Like, could you imagine, like, oh, hi, Queen Bess, oh yeah, you want to fire? No, don't fire, otherwise you'll reflect your giant explosive cannonball directly back into the zombie crew and possibly just one-shot the entire unit, maybe? I don't know. It sounds quite fun, though, I have to say, and a great troll spell. Vortex also, Talons of Night, rather. Icy Wind rolls out for the battlefield. Large, persistent, damaging Vortex spells, so kind of like Flame Storm, and it will likely last a long time. And Ancestral Warriors summon, so... Warriors' ancestors are summoned from the underworld, rising up to strike an enemy with furious assault before vanishing the earth once more. Summons a unit of ancestral warriors. Strong halberd infantry unit. It doesn't say ethereal specifically. I had automatically assumed that this was going to be an ethereal unit summon, but I guess it doesn't appear to be. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they just left that detail out, but I don't think they would. But regardless, having a high-tier halberd summon is okay. I mean... The dreaded 13th for Skaven mostly is good for the explosion. Like the actual Storm Vermin summon is kind of just a bonus. So we'll see how strong Ancestral Warriors actually are as a unit, if the summon ends up being worth it or not. But, I mean, Lore of Yin, there's like 4 or 5 spells here, I think, that could be really good. Depending on cost, I think Blossom Wind will be very efficient. Cloak of Jet, situationally, be very strong. Same for Missile Mirror. Like, in both of these, in matchups where you're going to be potentially outshot, they'll be really nice spells. Ancestral Warriors summons tend to be very competitive as well. So probably you will see a lot of that. But... let's have a look at the other, stepchild lore, Lore of Yang. So... we've got Jade Shield, which is just a basic ward save. Gives the unit significant damage resistance, so that's fine, if a little boring. Dragon's Breath is a breath spell that does fire damage. Again, okay, that's great. Wall of Wind and Fire is a wind spell. I think this is maybe the only wind spell we've seen here, like fully, column-style damage. Yeah, again, wide, slow-moving Wall of Fire is just great. I mean, it is good, don't get me wrong. I'm being a little facetious, but it's, yeah. I mean, nothing we haven't seen before. Hopefully the animation is awesome. Stone Ground Stance is area of effect, extra mass, and expert charge defense. This is so interesting. If you can potentially cast this on cavalry, like because, you have your, what are they, the Jade Warrior Cavalry, basically. Kind of, we haven't seen their stats yet, but sort of heavy, potentially heavy tank cavalry almost. If you can give them extra mass and expert charge defense, that's kind of hilarious and could be pretty awesome situationally. But overall, I mean, yeah, the extra mass thing seems interesting just because that's a modifier that we haven't seen before, and in the right situation could be quite strong, but I don't know. It might not be that great of a spell, to be honest, in practice. Might of Heaven and Earth is another augment. Single target this time. Imbues a unit with flaming magical attacks, increases their melee attack, base damage, and armor-piercing damage. So basically just a super juice fire damage weapon damage attack buff, so that's great. And big high tier explosion. This is the one that we see is not being cast here. It looks like the guy's winding up to get it ready. But yeah, the big explosion. So I'm not trying to bag on Lore of Yang or, to speak too ill of it, but just in comparison, like comparing these two lores side by side, I would say for multiplayer, Lore of Yin, like 9 times out of 10 is going to be more competitive. Like there's just more better spells here, I think. I guess a lot of it depends on how much damage these, like the breath and the wind and so forth, do. The area of effect damage spells can be very good also. Sometimes that's just what you want. So maybe there will be situations against, especially like Horde type factions, where you will want Lore of Yang, but we'll see. We shall see. Lore of Ice, moving on to Kislev. We've actually gotten to see this one in proper battle action. I myself got to use it a little bit while I was playing the survival battle for Kislev back during the summer. I guess late spring by now. So we've seen these a little bit, but Ice Sheet, just to remind you, is a hex with an area. Enemy units have reduced speed and charge speed, so that's okay. Not amazing, but it's alright. Comboing this with Frostbite, which for Kislev does have a lot of access to, will be quite nice for synergy, be able to kind of control the battlefield. Ice Maiden's Kiss is a breath, also applies Frostbite, so again, you see that synergy just within the magic here. Frost Blades gives a magic attacks, increased weapon damage, armor piercing, and melee attack. So, I mean, it will be nice against demons to be able to get magic on your melee units. Excuse me. Death Frost, direct damage. This one was pretty strong from what I remember. Maybe. I'm thinking of Heart of Winter. This is a area of effect direct damage, kind of like Dwellers Below, but that gets much more damaging over time. There was another one, too, in the trailer that we saw, like just going back here, that was like a Dwellers Below, but I don't remember. Anyway. Yeah. I don't actually. We'll come back to that later, perhaps. But anyway, Crystal Sanctuary is another kind of damage resistance buff. Cannot move, but has massive increase. I think it was like 60% plus damage resistance or something crazy like that. So, seems pretty decent. Yeah. Yeah, the reflect thing is interesting. I will definitely want to see like the damage reflection, the missile reflection, kind of how those mechanics play. Excuse me. Okay, so now we have a new lore, moving on from Lore of Ice, which we should be somewhat familiar with. If you're not, go ahead and go back and watch some of my content from like late May, I think early June is when we were doing this stuff. I want to say with the survival battle, Kislev versus Khorne. Anyway, moving on to Lore of Tempest, here you've got Gust of True Flight, which is range bonus and accuracy. Extra range is always nice, especially if it's a percentage-based modifier on, say, artillery. Just because they have such long range already, you could potentially get a substantial difference and be able to more significantly outrange, especially, on the very beginning of a battle, like your opponent deploys, on the front of their deployment zone, you deploy even slightly further back than your max range, so you can just immediately hit Gust of True Flight and start bombarding. So yeah, that might be good. Also, extra reload rate is always nice. Hailstorm, Bombardment. Or sorry, it's not reload rate, it's accuracy. Yeah, accuracy is less useful. Reload rate would be better. But anyway. Hailstorm is a bombardment here. Medium area bombarded with explosive projectiles. Seems pretty nice. Swiftwing, an area of effect augment. Speed and significant charge bonus increase. Okay, so this is your the Winged Hussars have arrived buff. Oh, yes. That's going to be great for cavalry charges. Significant increase to charge bonus is always awesome. Winds of Magic are gathered into a Freezing Gale for this next one. That's Biting Wind, a long column damage spell. So it's a wind type spell with a long column. Should be pretty good. Those mid-tier wind types like Penumbral Pendulum and Burning Head are both very competitive. So given that this is within the same, appears to be within the same bracket, Should be good. Hawks of Mishla, Vortex, summons frozen spirits of fear, hatred, and dread, and a randomly moving vortex that deals damage and applies discouraged to enemies, so it will lower leadership, will be fantastic against vortex and leadership debuff, which both means this will be great against high model count, low leadership factions. So Beastmen, Skaven, Greenskins potentially awesome. Blizzard is another vortex, snow and ice rise from the land, and large damaging vortex that also applies frostbite. So again, you want to control the battlefield while also dealing damage at the same time. Probably in campaign, this will be your main go-to if it's the highest damage spell. So yeah, there's that. And those are all the new lores of Magic. So a lot of exciting stuff to look through here. A couple of new mechanics and modifiers, a mass modifier, which, again, all of these modifiers being programmed into the game means that modders can also use them for their own purposes, and potentially we could see those new mechanics applied to existing lords, spells, abilities, whatever. So mass damage reflection, missile reflection. What else? I'm sure I'm missing. But Chaos is getting healing. Chaos is also getting a snare, potentially. I really hope that Warriors of Chaos get access to these 3 new god-specific lores, maybe with some new specific characters or something. But regardless, for their given factions, they will be very strong. We've also seen, each Chaos god has another lore of magic associated with them. Like Tzeentch, we saw, has lore of metal. I think Nurgle is lore of death, and Slaanesh is lore of shadows, so they'll at least have those additional lores. We may also see lore of fire, like Tzeentch has, his cultist has lore of fire, right? So, yeah, and then obviously once all the old world, quote-unquote, and new world factions get added in again, we'll see more lores of magic coming in there, so very good stuff. Honestly, this makes me really, really excited to play around and see some of these new factions. I do think that we'll see Nurgle and Slaanesh probably before the end of the year, definitely. I mean, possibly even before the end of the month. We'll see. The marketing pace has definitely picked up substantially within the last little while. So, yeah, let me know what you guys think, though, about these new spells. Will the new lores replace existing lores in viability? I do think for Warriors of Chaos, lore of Nurgle and lore of Slaanesh both could be really good if you had access to them. Fleshy Abundance in particular, just being able to heal some of your higher tier units for Warriors of Chaos would reopen. Because right now it's really hard to use something like a Shaggoth because it gets focused down so aggressively by ranged units in multiplayer. And just being able to heal that back up will be so strong. Not to mention, you've also got just in general, direct damage, rancid visitations probably also will be pretty good. But we should also go through and talk about the UI improvements that you will have seen in these screenshots. Excuse me. So we'll start out with Tzeentch's Firestorm. So you can see Vortex, right? It gives you a full breakdown of the specific damage, the duration, the radius of the Vortex, what proportion of the damage is armor piercing, the movement speed of the Vortex, cast range, cooldown. So just a lot more information is in the tooltip here, especially on the damage profiles of these spells, which is great. You can see with Slicing Shards here, awesome improvement. Range damage is 80 damage. So what this means is if you get hit directly by a projectile, you'll take 80 damage, and that is 100% armor piercing, also magic damage. And the explosive damage is 60, again, so any unit that gets hit by the explosion will also take 60 damage in addition, and that is also 100% armor piercing. Doesn't say magic damage, though, so that's interesting. So we go through and look at these other ones. Direct damage, rancid visitation. So the one thing I will say on the direct damage spells, and I think we'll see this on some of the others, is I don't know if they've changed so that the scaling no longer matters, but it should show how many targets it's hitting. For example, Spirit Leech hits one target at a time. So if you cast it on a unit of 120 Skaven slaves, let's say, only one of the Skaven slaves is going to be taking damage at a time. Whereas if you cast something like Flock of Doom, I forget the minimum, I want to say it's 45 models will be taking damage at the same time, which is how, like, certain direct damage spells are better against high model count, certain are better against low model count. It just depends on how many units are getting damaged by the spell. Now, in Game 3, from what I've seen, they do list the actual damage values in sort of expected DPS. What they don't tell you here is that there's a chance to resist, so this is kind of an unexpected range of possible damage outcomes. And it also doesn't show how many unit models you're hitting here. So I think that's one improvement they still could make to this UI, is to say how many unit models these direct damage spells are interacting with. That will allow you to say, okay, this is better against high or better against low. Or it may be possible that they've sort of removed that consideration and all direct damage spells are basically just going to be the same damage scaling, which would be, I guess, a little more boring, but fine. It would be easier to understand for newer players. Yeah, Missile Mirror, we get the icon for Spell Reflect. So again, this is a mechanic that we could see possibly implemented into other abilities. Remains to be seen. If we go down here, Constellation of the Dragon, you can see this one's only 33% armor-piercing damage. And it's just, everything that gets hit in that explosion takes 48 damage, 33% of which is armor-piercing. Yeah. I mean, the augments and debuffs haven't changed that much. The buffs and debuffs, if you will. And then, I mean, let's see. Blizzard, 3 damage per second, 100% armor piercing, 15-second duration. So it doesn't actually seem like it does that much damage, but it's hard to say. So a little bit of improvements there on the UI. I do appreciate that. Yeah, affected units. I don't know. Seems interesting, but yeah, I would imagine Horus Heresy that they'll get sorcerers for each of the new lores. I can't imagine them not adding them, but we'll see. Yeah, that's also true, Emperor, is all single entities have, and not only single entity monsters, but even like characters, all single entities have wounds, right? So they can potentially get debuffed while they're low. Given that, healing is going to become even stronger, and also remember that fire damage appears to reduce healing received. So, like giving a unit, for example, bound fire damage is going to be very strong against factions which can heal, right? So if you look at like what is it here? Not Stoneground Stance, I believe it was... Might of Heaven and Earth. Yeah, this one here. Imbues a unit with flaming magical attacks. So let's say you're up against, I don't know. Take your pick of a healing faction. You're up against Bretonia, and the Fey Enchantress has taken a bunch of damage. She's about to hit herself with a regrowth. Once you see that regrowth template pop up, whatever is fighting her, you just pop this Might of Heaven and Earth on them, imbue that flaming damage, and then all of a sudden the healing she receives from that regrowth is reduced by, I think it was up to 50%, I want to say. 25 or 50%, something like that. So, yeah, well, fire is going to be very good also. So there will be some new interactions with healing and single entities that will kind of play into how you'll use some of these new magics. If it's an area of effect healing spell, I believe some of these, yeah, like Dragon's Breath will also apply the fire contact effect, reducing healing, right? Because it does have fire damage. So, yeah, very interesting. I'm genuinely interested to see kind of how all of these work in practice, what the good spells end up being, what the crap spells end up being, those that are worth it, those that are not. A lot of it depends on the balancing of things, which is still ongoing, but from a sort of concept perspective, I would say all of these spells are pretty good. There's some that are somewhat basic to what we've seen before, but that's kind of to be expected, I guess. Yes, the fire damage it reduces all sources of healing, right? So that will make fire damage like obligatory against undead, all undead, because you just want it as much as you can always, which is pretty much the case already. Yeah, I'm curious to see what they'll do with the flying toggle too, if they possibly have a modifier that will force units to land. Like, let's say, Tempest, rather than dealing damage, would just force a unit to land and reduce their speed so you could catch it and kill it with something. I think that'd be pretty cool. But I don't know about that. None of that is specifically listed here, but certainly they seem to be willing to try new things with some of these new effects. So, anyway. Grab a drink here real quick. Yeah, Invocation of the Heck, strongest lore magic in the game. I mean, yeah. Lore Vampire's strongest lore in the game. Invocation of the Heck is one of the strongest spells in the game. But anyway, let's go on and just quickly talk about some other magic systems here. So the Magic Reserve system on the campaign map is getting a full-on overhaul. Basic early game starter army now begins with 50 reserves. If it's in a region with blowing, so if the winds of magic are increasing, you get, yeah. Let's see. Let me see if I can actually read this and make sense of it. Basic, so it provides +0 reserves. So you'll just, have 50 reserves of magic. If you move into a region with calm winds of magic, it will reduce by 10 per turn. So you'll have 40 reserves at the start of your next turn, and it will continue to drop. If it's a demon faction army, it will eventually start to receive debuffs, which is fun. Currently, the winds of magic on the campaign map, you kind of just don't care about. Like, they are there. It's a mechanic that exists. It's programmed into the game, but there's not, besides the amount of magic that you'll have in a given battle, which can matter, but it's not something you really think about that much. Oftentimes you don't even have a caster in your army in campaigns, so, it's not ideal, but, now, especially demons, which makes sense, will have a lot more interactions with the winds of magic. Yeah, so, so basically, getting back to it, while you're in regions with calm magic, your magic goes down. If it's a strong winds of magic region, if the winds are blowing strong, you get +5 per turn. You can also adopt the channeling Tzeentch, which will give you a further +15. So let's say you're in a region with calm winds of magic and you don't want to lose per turn, you can pop into your channeling stance and you'll receive a net +5. So that's nice. Heroes and lords with magic reserves skill will give an additional +20% gain, which is a total of +22, while in the strong region, the cap is at 100, where it will finally stop moving. So you can sort of more consciously control how much power reserve your army has. It doesn't just automatically change with the region. It will actually take a few turns to normalize to that region's sort of base value, I guess. Anyway, so demon factions will, other ways to increase it, obviously, research, dilemmas, items, post-battle. Tzeentch can, I think, just manipulate the winds of magic directly through his campaign mechanics, so there's that. All demon factions receive replenishment rate, leadership, physical resistance debuffs when they're at low reserves. When they're at high reserves, Tzeentch gets increased barrier recharge. And Tzeentch has other interactions as well with the winds of magic. Khorne gets extra spell resistance, and that's it. So, no, he doesn't get extra power reserve because he doesn't have spellcasters. Nurgle gets extra melee defense, and Slaanesh gets extra speed. So, you definitely will want to have, as much as you can, maintain high power reserve on your demon armies. And I'm sure there will be other ways to manipulate on that. They even say here, draining it from an enemy spellcaster with a Tzeentchian ritual. So, we saw earlier the spell that can actually drain enemy winds of magic. I'm wondering then if that translates, if you do that, a few times in battle, will that actually increase your power reserve on the campaign map as well? Because that would mean that spell suddenly is really, really good from a campaign perspective, but makes it almost useless for multiplayer. So, interesting. The opening deployment phase gamble for power from your reserve works much the same. So it's, you still get the power reserve that you have. It's just how much you start with. Your reserves will return to their pre-battle level once you're back in the campaign map. Okay, so maybe you can't actually harvest to increase, if it returns to your pre-battle level, then I guess you couldn't necessarily increase by, casting that specific spell in battle. But what if, for example, you took your army, mortal or otherwise, inside the Realm of Chaos? So this is where the Storm of Magic comes in. You guys might have heard a little bit about this already. Essentially, it's a new rule set that will, it basically gives all casters unlimited power reserve, right? So you can keep regenerating Winds of Magic endlessly. Yeah, let's see here. You get these Cataclysm spells. Each lore of Magic, well, not each lore, but all the common lores for the time being have a Cataclysm spell that's unlocked during this time as well. The battle will sort of go through the different lores randomly, and you don't even necessarily have to have a caster from that lore. You just have to have any caster to be able to use sort of that new spell as an army ability. So, these new sort of Cataclysm spells for each of the common lores we'll just go through quickly. And there's also a passive effect as well while that lore is sort of selected. So for the lore of Beasts, while that lore is active, all units become immune to psychology and gain charge bonuses. Cataclysm spell is Merxiu's Monstrous Regiment. I probably just butchered that, but Strength of the Wild is imbued on one unit's weapon damage, armor piercing, melee attack, and physical resistance. Given that they said these effects are super strong, and since it's only on one unit, I would imagine that this is going to just insanely juice them. Lore of Life, all units gain perfect vigor. Awesome. Storm of Renewal, a tree sprouts from the ground as raw life energy flows across the battlefield, providing a huge regeneration aura, massive AoE heal to be expected. Lore of Death, all units gain armor-piercing melee damage. Awesome. Their Cataclysm spell, Ashes and Dust, a suffocating dust cloud, chokes the life from enemies in a wide area after a short windup, so massive AoE damage. Seems appropriate. Lore of Life, AoE heal. Lore of Death, AoE damage. Makes sense. Lore of Fire, all units get bonus melee attack. Awesome. Also a big AoE damage. Massive eruption protrudes from the ground, burning everything in the area in magical fire. Awesome. Lore of Heavens, all missile units deal extra damage and extra armor piercing damage. So this is one that you'll want to have active as much as possible if you're playing Cathay or Kislev or any missile-focused faction, Empire. Thorson's Thunderstorm is the Cataclysm spell. A great storm develops over the battlefield, annihilating an area. So again, big area of effect damage. Lore of Light, all units gain magic attacks and immune to psychology. Will be awesome while you're fighting demons. If you're in the Realm of Chaos, like doing fighting a demon army, and all of a sudden Lore of Light is the active lore, that's great for the mortal forces fighting the demons. Time Amok is a Cataclysm spell. Flow of Time is altered over a portion of the battlefield, improving allies' reload skill, speed, and melee attack. Awesome. Just like a juiced Verona's Time Warp. Lore of Metal. All units receive bonus armor and missile resistance while it's active. The Cataclysm spell, Gehenna's Golden Globe. Not Hound's, Globe. A great molten sphere emerges from the earth and rolls across enemy forces. So again, AoE damage. Bonus armor and missile resistance also going to be very good for the demons, conversely, if you're fighting against mortals who have a lot of missiles, or if you're fighting against Tzeentch, the missile resistance will be awesome. Lore of Shadows here, extra charge and a faster charge and movement speed. So charge speed is a pretty rare modifier in general, so that's awesome. Dance of Despair is a Cataclysm spell. A haunting tune envelops enemies in an area, reducing their leadership, melee defense, and melee attack. So a giant aura debuff seems appropriate for Lore of Shadows. Khorne gets extra spell resistance from being in the Storm of Magic, and that's it. I'd imagine they haven't talked about the dwarfs. Obviously, probably not going to talk too much about them until the integration, possibly, and really kind of tightening up their mechanics as it relates to these. But I would imagine dwarfs also get extra spell resistance. Maybe they get a significantly reduced cooldown on their runes or something. I'm not sure. It remains to be seen if any, what benefits they'll get from Storm of Magic. But Seems awesome. I really, 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 really hope this is a setting for multiplayer or for custom battles, so you can just go in and, like, there's a box that says Storm of Magic, and you can click the checkbox, and all of a sudden it's a Storm of Magic type battle with the unlimited magic and the... Because just, I mean, from a competitive perspective, it's not probably something that's going to be used in a lot of tournaments. Maybe you'll see some Storm of Magic tournaments, but... just in general, I think it would be awesome and a lot of fun. And like for the people who record the cinematic gameplay battles, for example, it's great for them to be able to have unlimited magic to just, set up the shots specifically how they want. They can maybe do a shot multiple times without having to, play the battle multiple times. If the laboratory makes it into Game 3, you can increase the unit sizes and also just make unlimited magic. Some, again, pretty hilarious potential for videos. So, from an aesthetic perspective, from a fun perspective, please, 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 please enable that for custom battles in some form or another. But anyway, yeah, so lots of magic stuff to talk about, think about. The new Chaos lores, it doesn't look like, have the... Cataclysm spells or a passive buff, so I'd imagine then that the other faction-specific lores, like, Lore of Little and Big Wa, the Skaven's lores, Lore of Deeps, even probably Lore of Vampires, most likely will not get a Cataclysm spell. I do hope that, like, Lore of Darkness and Lore of High Magic can at least get a Cataclysm spell once High Elves and Dark Elves are integrated, and Wood Elves, I guess, as well. But yeah, awesome stuff. FFA, could you imagine a Storm of Magic FFA? That would be wild. Yes. yes. I'm going back, just getting some comments here. Kairos will probably have healing from Lore of Life shards he can equip. Makes me wonder how tanky the Soul Grinders are. Yeah, especially if he can equip those, the shards in multiplayer, which I really, really hope they figure out a system. I've already sort of thought of a system where they could potentially do it, but yeah, Kairos could potentially have healing for Tzeentch. Limiting their healing for their summoned ranged. Yeah, I mean, Coast, I would say the healing nerf will be most felt, I think, by the vampire counts, because they have so much passive healing. Like Tomb King's also, the Realm of Souls already doesn't heal that much, to be honest, and just reducing it by that much, it will make it even worse. So, looking great, Julian. All the new lores magic are looking awesome. Horn is going to be low microfaction, most likely. Yeah, they seem like they might actually be, yeah, low micro. Let's say. Yes. No fancy tactics. Charge and smash. Yes, correct, Lewis. You don't need any, you just need any caster. So, Tzeentch can potentially, while he's, let's say you're fighting Tzeentch and you're invading Nurgle's realm, and there's a Storm of Magic in the particular battle that you're fighting, and you can get Lore of Life on your Tzeentch units, yes, because you'll pretty much always have a caster, right, in your Tzeentch armies. I mean, I don't think you can't not have a caster, so, or like, yeah, let's say you're invading with Miao Ying. She has, what, life and in, right? So you'll come in here, and then, let's say the active lore is Lore of Beasts. Then yes, you'll still get the benefit from the Immune Psychology and Charge bonus, and you'll also get, the Cataclysm spell usable. So, and I think Tzeentch actually has a mechanic where he can pick which one is first. Maybe I'm totally not even remembering that correctly. Let's see here. Yeah, on the flip side, Tzeentch's Mastery of Magic means that a Tzeentch army in a Storm of Magic battle gets to pick what the first lore in Ascendancy will be. So it's somewhat random, but with Tzeentch, at least you can pick the first one. So in the opening phase of the battle, you can get whatever effect you want. Most likely some kind of speed, whichever one affects movement speed. I guess probably your Lore of Shadows. in the opening phase, or if you're going to get absolutely blasted by missiles, maybe you do, Lore of Metal as your first for the extra armor and missile resistance on the approach. Interesting. Very, very interesting. My question is, what happens if you get a Tzeentch fighting Tzeentch, if that's possible? Which it seems like it would be likely that it's possible. Who gets to pick? Yeah, I mean, the thing is, even in a melee rush Tzeentch army, you're still going to have missile units, because they don't have enough melee units to take a functional army without taking at least some missile units. So, yeah, and it still might be sort of a missile rush if it's a lot of mid-range, which it did seem like Tzeentch doesn't have any artillery, so interesting. Very interesting. Yes, well, I think that's basically it for the news for today. I've talked about all the magic stuff that I wanted to talk about, so just wanted to say thank you all so much for coming out. It's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah, let me just quickly do this here. We're going to end shortly. Feel free to pop any last questions in the chat if you would like. I'm just preparing a little end slide real quick. I forgot to do this beforehand, so guys, let's get some music going as well. So good stuff. This has made me pretty hyped, honestly. A lot of the new Magic stuff looks awesome. New fun mechanics might be potentially quite broken, but also could be really interesting. I do hope that some of these sort of new modifiers and effects are backported onto some old factions and whatnot, but okay. So big shout out to my patrons. I am going to make a version of this that includes the YouTube channel members as well. I know there's some overlap there, but yeah, just wanted to say thanks. Shout out to you all as we're kind of ending here. Yeah, horrors are probably not the best in combat. The Disc Knights could be pretty good. A lot of hit and run. It's probably more going to be of like a Wood Elves style rush where it's, concentrated in a specific area. You're relying a lot on fast, hard-hitting attack units to break quickly. And probably shock magic as well, I would imagine. Especially if you have, like, it seems like from what they've said, the Flamer, the Exalted Flamer, and the Burning Chariot are exceptionally high damage. It seems like they'll just wreck units super fast. So, shock charges, shock shooting, you should be able to break units fairly quickly, and it's it's sort of like a Wood Elves rush almost in a way, right? But I want to play it already. I know, right? And yeah, I mean, we still got quite a bit of time until 2022. I'm really hoping it's earlier rather than later in 2022. With them going so ham on the marketing, I can't imagine that they're, it's going to be like April or May. I would imagine that it's probably going to be in the first part of the year at some point, but yes. Yeah, it's good for them to take their time, make sure they get everything right, but at the same time, it's like, it's so exciting, everything's so awesome. I guess credit to them making everything so awesome that we want to play it, but looking forward to Slaanesh and Nurgle trailers, and I'm also looking forward to the reveal for pre-order faction, which most people think is going to be ogres. But thank y'all so much. That's it for me for today.